Now listen closely, because this is not about motivation. It is about responsibility, the kind that changes outcomes, the kind that alters direction, the kind that separates those who hope from those who decide. Most people spend their lives negotiating with circumstances, arguing with reality, waiting for conditions to improve. But progress does not respond to waiting. It responds to ownership. The moment you accept full responsibility, something shifts. Your language changes. Your standards rise. Your future becomes negotiable by you. This is not harsh. It is freeing, because when you stop blaming, you gain power. When you stop explaining, you gain clarity. And when you stop expecting life to change, you finally do. This message is not comfortable, but it is precise, and precision builds results. Stay with this, because what you are about to hear is a formula. Simple, demanding, unavoidable. And once you understand it, you will never look at your life the same way again. Personal responsibility is the starting point of all progress, because nothing meaningful ever changes until ownership is assumed. Before strategy, before discipline, before habits, before mindset techniques, there is a single internal decision that determines whether a person advances or remains stuck. The decision to accept that their life in its current condition is the result of their choices, interpretations, actions, and standards. This idea is not comforting, and it is not designed to soothe the ego. It is designed to awaken power. The moment an individual understands that progress begins with responsibility, they stop waiting for permission from circumstances and start issuing commands to themselves. Responsibility is not about guilt or self-criticism. It is about causation. It is the clear recognition that outcomes do not happen randomly, and that whatever continues to happen is being allowed, reinforced, or tolerated in some way. Most people misunderstand responsibility because they associate it with burden rather than leverage. They think responsibility means carrying blame for everything that goes wrong, when in reality it means gaining authority over what happens next. Responsibility does not mean that everything is your fault, but it does mean that everything is your problem to solve if you want it solved. This distinction is crucial. Fault looks backward and weakens action. Responsibility looks forward and demands action. When a person refuses responsibility, they also refuse the power to change. They may be justified in their explanations, but justification never produces results. Life does not reward fairness. It responds to effectiveness. The individual who accepts responsibility immediately steps into a position of influence, because influence always follows ownership. Progress cannot begin in an environment of blame. Blame disperses energy outward, scattering focus across people, systems, timing, luck, and conditions. Responsibility concentrates energy inward, where control actually exists. When someone says, "This happened because of the economy," or "because of my past," or "because of other people," they may be factually correct, but they have simultaneously surrendered their leverage. They have placed the cause of their life outside themselves, which means the solution must also come from outside. That is a dangerous psychological position, because it turns the individual into a dependent observer rather than an active participant. Responsibility reverses this position. It says, regardless of how this started, I decide how it continues. That decision alone marks the beginning of progress. All personal growth frameworks, whether financial, emotional, physical or professional, quietly assume responsibility as their foundation. Discipline only works for someone who believes they are responsible for their results. Goal setting only matters to someone who believes their actions shape outcomes. Learning only accelerates when a person accepts responsibility for their ignorance and chooses to correct it. Without responsibility, every tool becomes cosmetic. People read books, watch videos, attend seminars, and repeat affirmations, yet nothing changes because the core belief remains untouched, the belief that life should improve without them having to fundamentally change. Responsibility shatters that illusion. It forces an internal reckoning where a person sees themselves not as a victim of circumstances, but as a manager of causes. This is why responsibility is uncomfortable. It removes psychological hiding places. It eliminates excuses, not by argument, but by irrelevance. Once responsibility is accepted, excuses no longer matter because they do not alter the requirement to act. A person may have 10 valid reasons for why something is difficult, unfair, or delayed, and still be required to do the work. Responsibility does not debate difficulty. It asks for response. It does not deny hardship. It demands adaptation. That demand is precisely what initiates growth. Muscles grow by resistance, skills grow by challenge, and character grows by accountability. Responsibility also establishes standards, and standards determine behavior. When someone holds themselves responsible, they stop asking what they can get away with and start asking what is required. Their internal dialogue shifts from negotiation to command. They become less interested in motivation and more committed to discipline, because discipline is simply responsibility practiced daily. They begin to understand that progress is not dramatic, it is cumulative. Small, responsible actions repeated consistently compound into visible change. This compounding effect is invisible to those who avoid responsibility because they are always searching for breakthroughs rather than building foundations. Another critical aspect of responsibility is that it restores dignity. Dependence erodes self-respect, while responsibility strengthens it. When a person knows that their effort matters, that their decisions carry weight, they experience a sense of agency that no external validation can replace. This agency fuels confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from self-trust. Self-trust is built when a person keeps commitments to themselves, and that only happens when they believe they are responsible for the outcome of those commitments. Over time, this creates an upward psychological spiral where effort reinforces belief, belief reinforces effort, and progress becomes inevitable. Responsibility also simplifies life. Without it, people overanalyze, overexplain, and overthink. With it, the question becomes straightforward. What can I do right now with what I have? This question cuts through complexity and forces action. It does not wait for perfect conditions because responsibility understands that conditions are rarely perfect and often irrelevant. Progress belongs to those who act in imperfect environments with imperfect information. Responsibility trains the mind to focus on controllables rather than obsess over variables that cannot be influenced. This focus is what creates momentum, and momentum is more valuable than motivation. Importantly, responsibility is not a one-time decision. It is a daily posture. Each day presents opportunities to either reinforce responsibility or abandon it. Every excuse entertained weakens it. Every hard choice honored strengthens it. Over time, responsibility becomes identity. A responsible person does not need to be pushed. They are pulled by standards. They do not wait to be held accountable. They hold themselves accountable. This internal accountability is what separates high performers from everyone else. Because external pressure is inconsistent, but internal pressure is constant. Progress in any domain ultimately answers one question: who is in charge here? When responsibility is absent, circumstances are in charge. When responsibility is present, the individual is. This is why responsibility is the starting point and not merely one principle among many. Without it, nothing else holds. With it, everything becomes possible, because once a person accepts responsibility for their direction, they begin to see options where they once saw limitations, choices where they once saw constraints, and opportunity where they once saw obstruction. And from that shift, movement begins and continues as long as responsibility remains the governing principle rather than a temporary attitude. Blame weakens because it transfers power away from the individual and hands it over to external forces, people, timing, or conditions. The moment blame enters the mind, progress quietly exits. This happens because blame is psychologically attractive, but strategically destructive. It feels relieving in the short term because it protects the ego from discomfort. But in the long term, it erodes strength, clarity, and effectiveness. Blame allows a person to explain why something happened without requiring them to change anything about how they think, decide, or act. Ownership does the opposite. Ownership is demanding. It strips away emotional padding and forces confrontation with reality. Yet that demand is precisely what creates empowerment. Blame always points outward. It says the cause of my condition exists somewhere else, in other people, in circumstances, in the past, in systems, in bad luck. Even when those factors are real, blame assigns them authority, and whatever holds authority controls outcomes. This is why blame weakens at a structural level. It teaches the mind that results are produced externally, which trains the individual to wait, complain, or hope rather than act. A blaming mindset becomes reactive rather than proactive. It responds to life instead of shaping it. Over time, this reaction-based posture drains initiative and replaces it with frustration. Ownership points inward, but not in a self-destructive way. It does not mean self-attack or denial of reality. It means recognizing that while you may not control everything that happens, you always control how you respond, what you learn, what you tolerate, and what you choose next. That recognition instantly restores leverage. Leverage is the ability to influence outcomes, and influence only exists where responsibility is accepted. A person who takes ownership does not waste energy proving why they are right. They invest energy in becoming effective. They stop asking who caused the problem and start asking how to solve it. This shift alone separates stagnation from progress. Blame also fragments focus. When someone blames, their attention scatters across multiple targets. They replay conversations. They analyze unfairness. They dwell on what others should have done differently. This mental diffusion weakens execution. Ownership concentrates focus. It simplifies the mental landscape by narrowing attention to what can be done now. This concentration produces decisiveness, and decisiveness produces momentum. Momentum is not emotional, it is mechanical. It comes from repeated forward motion, not from feeling inspired. Ownership creates that motion because it eliminates debate about whether action is required. Another reason blame weakens is that it reinforces helpless identity. The stories people tell themselves shape how they behave. A blaming narrative casts the individual as a responder to forces beyond their control. Over time, this narrative becomes identity. This is how things are. People like me don't get ahead. The system is stacked. Even when partially true, these narratives shrink the individual's sense of possibility. Ownership rewrites identity. It frames the individual as an agent rather than an object. An agent acts, an object is acted upon. This distinction is subtle but decisive. Ownership trains the mind to ask, what role did I play and what role can I play next? That question is empowering because it implies influence. Ownership also builds resilience. When someone blames, setbacks feel personal and permanent. Each obstacle becomes evidence that life is unfair or that effort is pointless. This perception drains persistence. Ownership reframes setbacks as feedback rather than verdicts. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? The individual asks, what does this require of me now? This framing preserves energy and directs it toward adaptation. Resilient people are not those who avoid difficulty. They are those who refuse to surrender agency when difficulty appears. Ownership is the mechanism that enables that refusal. Blame encourages emotional stagnation. It keeps people anchored to past events because blame is retrospective by nature. It looks backward, replaying what should not have happened. Ownership is forward-facing. It acknowledges the past without living in it. It treats the past as information, not as a prison. This forward orientation is essential for growth because progress is always constructed in the present. A person who takes ownership understands that even if they were wronged, delayed, or disadvantaged, the future still demands their participation. Ownership does not wait for fairness. It acts in spite of unfairness. Empowerment is often misunderstood as confidence or boldness, but true empowerment is quiet and practical. It is the steady belief that effort matters. Ownership cultivates this belief through evidence. Each time a person accepts responsibility and takes action, they generate proof that their behavior influences outcomes. This proof accumulates and becomes self-trust. Self-trust is the foundation of empowerment. Without it, people rely on external validation, permission, or pressure. With it, they move independently of mood or circumstance. Ownership builds self-trust because it aligns intention with action repeatedly over time. Blame also weakens relationships. When individuals default to blame, communication becomes defensive and transactional. Conversations revolve around justification rather than improvement. Ownership transforms relationships by introducing accountability without hostility. An individual who takes ownership can say, "Here is what I could have done better," without diminishing themselves. This posture disarms conflict and invites collaboration. It also earns respect because ownership signals maturity and strength. People instinctively trust those who do not hide behind excuses. At a deeper level, blame weakens because it postpones adulthood. Psychological adulthood is not defined by age, but by responsibility. A blaming mindset seeks caretakers, saviors, or villains. An ownership mindset seeks solutions. This distinction determines whether a person remains dependent or becomes self-directed. Self Directed individuals do not need constant supervision or motivation because their behavior is governed by internal standards rather than external enforcement. Ownership establishes those standards. Ownership also creates alignment between values and behavior. Many people value growth, integrity, and success, but their behavior contradicts these values because blame provides an escape. Ownership removes that escape. It forces congruence. When behavior aligns with values, internal friction decreases. This reduces stress and increases clarity. Clarity improves decision making, and better decisions compound into better outcomes. Empowerment is not a feeling, it is the byproduct of alignment. The difference between blame and ownership is ultimately the difference between being right and being effective. Blame often wins arguments but loses progress. Ownership may concede arguments but wins results. Life does not reward correct explanations. It rewards effective responses. Those who understand this stop investing in narratives that protect their pride and start investing in actions that change their position. This investment pays dividends not immediately, but inevitably, because reality responds to behavior, not to justification. And the individual who abandons blame and embraces ownership steps into a position where effort once again produces leverage. Leverage produces movement, and movement gradually transforms circumstances into consequences rather than constraints. Results are earned, not negotiated, because life does not respond to intention, desire, or explanation. It responds to action applied consistently over time. This principle confronts one of the most common human tendencies, which is to mentally bargain with reality. People negotiate in their minds, believing that effort should be optional, that circumstances should accommodate their preferences, or that wanting something deeply should count for something. But reality is indifferent to negotiation. It does not recognize promises, good intentions, or potential. It recognizes only behavior and the consequences that follow. Understanding this distinction is essential because it removes confusion about why effort sometimes feels disconnected from outcome. Results are not granted as rewards for effort alone. They are produced by effective effort applied in the right direction repeatedly. Negotiation with life often takes subtle forms. It shows up as internal dialogue that says, "I've tried enough," or "I deserve a break now," or "This should be easier by now." These statements are not requests for rest. They are attempts to renegotiate the terms of reality. The problem is that reality does not renegotiate. It simply continues operating under the same laws of cause and effect. When someone stops producing the required causes, the effects stop appearing. This is not punishment, it is neutrality. Life is not withholding results. It is merely responding to the inputs it receives. Once this is understood, frustration begins to dissolve because frustration often comes from expecting outcomes without supplying sufficient causes. Earning results requires abandoning entitlement. Entitlement assumes that certain outcomes should occur because of identity, effort in the past, or comparison to others. This mindset weakens performance because it shifts attention from execution to expectation. When expectation replaces execution, disappointment becomes inevitable. People who earn results understand that each outcome must be produced anew. Yesterday's effort does not pay today's bills. Past discipline does not guarantee future progress. Every day presents a new ledger. This perspective may sound demanding, but it is stabilizing. It removes emotional volatility and replaces it with a steady commitment to process. When results are seen as earned, consistency becomes non-negotiable. Negotiation also manifests through excuses framed as reasoning. People often explain why conditions are not ideal, why timing is wrong, or why resources are insufficient. While these observations may be accurate, they function as attempts to alter the requirements for results. The assumption is that if the explanation is strong enough, reality should relax its standards. It never does. Results demand what they demand regardless of explanation. This does not mean ignoring constraints. It means working within them. Those who earn results do not wait for perfect conditions. They produce progress in imperfect environments. They understand that adaptation is part of the earning process, not an exception to it. Earning results also requires precision. Vague effort produces vague outcomes. Many people work hard, but do not see results because their effort is misaligned. They are busy, but not effective. They negotiate with themselves by substituting activity for accuracy. True earning requires clarity about what actually produces the desired outcome. This clarity often comes through feedback, which many people resist because feedback can challenge self-image. However, without feedback, effort remains inefficient. Those who earn results actively seek correction. They adjust strategies without emotional attachment. They treat performance as a variable to be optimized, not as a reflection of self-worth. The concept of earning also eliminates resentment. When people believe results are negotiated, they feel cheated when outcomes do not match effort. This resentment drains energy and corrodes motivation. When results are seen as earned, disappointment becomes information rather than injustice. The question shifts from, why didn't this work? To, what must be improved? This shift preserves momentum. Momentum is fragile and resentment destroys it quickly. Earning results requires emotional maturity, the ability to separate effort from entitlement and persistence from pride. Another important aspect of earning is delayed gratification. Negotiation seeks immediate payoff. Earning accepts delay as part of the process. Many worthwhile results require time to mature. Skills take repetition. Trust takes consistency. Financial stability takes disciplined accumulation. Negotiation becomes tempting during this delay. The mind starts bargaining for shortcuts, validation, or early rewards. Those who earn results resist this impulse. They continue applying the required inputs, even when feedback is minimal. This patience is not passive. It is disciplined endurance. Over time, delayed results often arrive in clusters, appearing sudden to observers, but predictable to those who understand the process. Earning results also demands humility. Negotiation assumes that reality should adjust to the individual. Earning assumes the individual must adjust to reality. This humility is not weakness. It is strategic alignment. When someone studies the demands of a goal and adapts themselves accordingly, they increase their probability of success. Humility allows learning, and learning improves effectiveness. Arrogance negotiates. Humility earns. This distinction determines whether a person evolves or stagnates. The idea that results are earned also clarifies responsibility. If results are negotiated, failure feels personal and discouraging. If results are earned, failure is instructional. It signals that the required inputs have not yet been fully supplied or properly applied. This interpretation maintains psychological stability. It prevents collapse after setbacks and reduces the temptation to quit prematurely. Quitting often occurs not because the goal is unattainable, but because the individual is negotiating rather than earning, expecting progress without fully meeting the requirements. Earning results builds self-respect. When a person knows that what they have achieved was produced by disciplined effort, their confidence is grounded. It does not depend on praise or comparison. It is rooted in evidence. This grounded confidence is resilient. It does not inflate during success or collapse during difficulty. It remains steady because it is based on process rather than outcome. Those who earn results trust themselves because they know they can produce again. At its core, this principle strips life of illusion and replaces it with law. Causes produce effects. Effort applied correctly produces progress. Consistency multiplies impact. Negotiation is emotional. Earning is mechanical. Once a person internalizes this, they stop pleading with reality and start working with it. They study what is required, supply it daily, and adjust as needed. This approach removes drama and replaces it with direction. It does not guarantee ease, but it guarantees fairness because reality applies the same standards to everyone, and those who meet them move forward while those who negotiate remain stationary, not because they were denied opportunity, but because they attempted to bargain where only execution was accepted. Discipline is the bridge between intention and outcome because intention alone has no force in the physical world until it is converted into repeated, directed action. Many people live at the level of intention. They plan, they promise, they visualize, and they sincerely want change. Yet wanting does not produce results. Discipline does. Discipline is not an emotional state. It is a behavioral system. It is the practice of doing what must be done regardless of mood, convenience, or immediate reward. Without discipline, intention remains abstract and outcomes remain hypothetical. With discipline, intention becomes operational and begins to shape reality. The misunderstanding of discipline is one of the primary reasons people struggle to maintain progress. Discipline is often viewed as punishment, restriction, or severity. In truth, discipline is structure. It is the structure that protects intention from distraction, fatigue, and impulse. Intention is fragile. It can be undermined by stress, boredom, fear, or temporary discomfort. Discipline stabilizes intention by embedding it into routine. When action is scheduled rather than negotiated, consistency emerges. Consistency is what produces measurable change. This is why disciplined individuals appear reliable, not because they are more motivated, but because they have removed decision-making from moments of weakness. The gap between intention and outcome is where most people fail. They intend to improve their health, their finances, their skills, their relationships, yet the gap remains unclosed because intention does not automatically dictate behavior. Discipline closes the gap by establishing non-negotiable actions that align with the desired outcome. It translates abstract goals into concrete behaviors. For example, the intention to be healthier means nothing without disciplined eating habits, training schedules, and recovery practices. The intention to grow professionally means nothing without disciplined learning, preparation, and execution. Discipline is the mechanism that ensures alignment between what one wants and what one does. Discipline also protects against self-deception. People often confuse intention with progress. They feel productive, because they have thought about change, talked about change, or planned for change. Discipline exposes the truth by demanding evidence in the form of action. It removes ambiguity. Either the behavior is happening or it is not. This clarity can be uncomfortable, but it is essential. Growth requires honesty, and discipline enforces honesty by making behavior visible. When discipline is present, excuses lose credibility because the standard is clear. Another essential aspect of discipline is that it reduces reliance on motivation. Motivation fluctuates. It is influenced by sleep, stress, emotion, and environment. Discipline operates independently of these variables. It creates a baseline of performance that does not depend on feeling inspired. This is why disciplined individuals continue to progress during periods of doubt or fatigue, while others stall. They understand that feelings are unreliable signals for action. They act first and allow feelings to follow. Over time, this produces a paradoxical effect where discipline actually increases motivation because consistent action generates momentum, and momentum reinforces belief. Discipline also compounds. Small disciplined actions, when repeated daily, accumulate into significant results. This compounding effect is often underestimated because it is subtle at first. Early efforts appear to produce little change, which tempts people to abandon discipline prematurely. Those who persist understand that the value of discipline is not immediate but cumulative. Each disciplined action is a deposit into a system that eventually yields disproportionate returns. This is why discipline often appears boring. It lacks drama. It is quiet, repetitive, and uncelebrated. Yet it is precisely this ordinariness that makes it powerful. Discipline also builds identity. Repeated behavior shapes self-perception. When a person consistently acts in alignment with their intentions, they begin to see themselves as someone who follows through. This identity shift is crucial. It creates internal pressure to maintain consistency. Discipline becomes self-reinforcing. The individual no longer asks whether they should act, they assume they will. This assumption simplifies decision making and reduces internal conflict. Over time, discipline becomes less effortful, not because it is easier, but because it is integrated into identity. Another reason discipline is the bridge between intention and outcome, is that it creates resilience under resistance. Resistance is inevitable. There will be days when progress feels slow, when effort feels heavy, and when results are not visible. Discipline carries intention across these periods. It prevents temporary discomfort from derailing long-term objectives. Without discipline, intention collapses under pressure. With discipline, pressure becomes part of the process. This resilience is not emotional toughness, it is procedural reliability. The system continues functioning regardless of internal noise. Discipline also introduces precision into effort. Intention can be vague. Discipline requires specificity. It demands defined actions, timelines, and standards. This specificity improves efficiency. When actions are clear, energy is not wasted on deliberation. This efficiency becomes increasingly important as responsibilities grow. Disciplined individuals manage their energy better because they allocate it intentionally rather than reactively. They are less likely to overcommit or drift because their actions are anchored to purpose. At a deeper level, discipline represents self-respect. When someone honors commitments to themselves, they reinforce the belief that their word matters. This belief strengthens self-trust. which is essential for leadership and autonomy. A person who cannot trust themselves to act consistently becomes dependent on external enforcement. Discipline restores independence by making the individual their own authority. This autonomy is empowering because it reduces reliance on external validation or pressure. Discipline also clarifies priorities. It forces choices. Time and energy are limited, and discipline allocates them deliberately. This allocation reveals what truly matters. Many people claim certain goals, but live in ways that contradict them. Discipline exposes these contradictions and demands resolution. Either the goal is adjusted or behavior is. This alignment reduces internal tension and increases effectiveness. Clear priorities lead to focused effort, and focused effort produces outcomes. Ultimately, discipline is not about restriction, it is about freedom. It frees the individual from the chaos of impulse, the volatility of emotion, and the instability of inconsistency. It creates a predictable path from intention to outcome. Without discipline, intention remains hope. With discipline, hope becomes process. And process, when sustained, produces results not through chance or inspiration, but through the steady application of effort in alignment with purpose until the outcome is no longer a possibility, but a consequence of what has been done day after day without negotiation. Life responds to standards, not wishes, because reality is structured around thresholds, not intentions. A wish is an emotional preference. A standard is a behavioral requirement. Life does not evaluate what someone hopes for. It reacts to what someone consistently tolerates and enforces. This distinction explains why many people want better outcomes, yet continue experiencing the same patterns. They wish for change, but maintain the same standards. And since standards govern behavior, and behavior governs results, nothing shifts. Change begins not when desire intensifies, but when standards rise. Standards operate quietly. They are rarely announced, but they are always expressed. The way a person manages their time, health, finances, relationships, and commitments reveals their standards with precision. Someone may say they value growth, but if they tolerate chronic distraction, inconsistency, or mediocrity, their lived standard contradicts their stated value. Life responds to the lived standard. It does not respond to verbal declarations. This is why results often feel disconnected from desire. Desire speaks. Standards act. A standard is what a person accepts without protest. It is the line they refuse to cross or allow others to cross. It is what they will consistently enforce even when enforcement is uncomfortable. Wishing requires no enforcement. Standards demand it. For example, wishing to be respected costs nothing. Holding a standard of respect requires boundaries, consequences, and sometimes conflict. Life responds to the latter because it introduces structure. Structure creates predictability. Predictability shapes outcomes. Standards also function as filters. They determine what enters and exits a person's life. Low standards allow chaos, inconsistency, and misalignment to persist. High standards filter out what does not serve progress. This filtering effect applies across domains. In work, standards determine the quality of output. In relationships, they determine the quality of interaction. In self-development, they determine the quality of effort. Life responds by matching the level of structure imposed. When standards are low, outcomes are unstable. When standards are high, outcomes stabilize. One of the reasons people resist raising standards is because it creates immediate discomfort. Wishing allows comfort without change. Standards require change without comfort. Raising standards often means letting go of habits, relationships, or identities that once felt familiar. This transition can feel like loss even when it leads to improvement. Many people prefer the familiarity of low standards to the uncertainty of higher ones. Life does not intervene in this preference. It simply reflects it back in the form of results that match the chosen tolerance. Standards also eliminate negotiation. When standards are clear, decisions become simpler. There is no debate about whether to act. The question is no longer, do I feel like it? But does this meet the standard? This shift removes emotional variability from execution. It replaces mood-based behavior with principle-based behavior. Life responds to this consistency because consistency produces reliability. Reliable input produces reliable output. Another important function of standards is that they protect future outcomes. Wishing is present-focused. It wants relief now. Standards are future-focused. They consider the long-term consequences of current behavior. A person with high standards may accept short-term discomfort to avoid long-term regret. This foresight is rare, but it is rewarded. Life responds by delivering outcomes that reflect sustained discipline rather than impulsive comfort. Over time, this creates a widening gap between those who operate on wishes and those who operate on standards. Standards also shape identity. What a person repeatedly enforces becomes part of who they are. When someone raises their standards, they begin to see themselves differently. They become someone who does not tolerate certain behaviors, including from themselves. This self-respect alters posture, communication, and decision-making. Others respond accordingly. Opportunities align. Chaos recedes. None of this happens because of wishing. It happens because the individual has changed what they are willing to accept. Wishes often create passive expectation. Standards create active participation. A person who wishes waits for conditions to improve. A person with standards improves their conditions through consistent enforcement. This enforcement may involve saying no more often. It may involve increasing effort, refining skill, or restructuring environment. Whatever the form, the message to reality is clear. This is the level at which I operate. Reality responds by either conforming or forcing adjustment. Either way, progress occurs. Life also responds to standards through consequence. When standards are absent, behavior becomes inconsistent and consequences become unpredictable. When standards are present, behavior becomes aligned and consequences become manageable. This predictability reduces anxiety and increases confidence. The individual no longer feels at the mercy of chance because they have introduced order. Order is what life responds to. It is the difference between chaos and control. Standards are also cumulative. Raising one standard often necessitates raising others. For example, a higher standard for productivity requires a higher standard for rest, focus, and boundaries. This integration creates coherence. The individual's life begins to operate as a system rather than a collection of reactions. Life responds to systems because systems produce repeatable results. Wishing produces isolated bursts of effort that fade. Standards produce sustained patterns. At the deepest level, standards represent self-valuation. They answer the question of what someone believes they are worth. not what they say they are worth, but what they demonstrate through enforcement. Life mirrors this valuation. When a person values their time, energy, and growth, they structure their life accordingly. Opportunities that match this valuation appear, not by coincidence, but by alignment. Low standards attract low-level outcomes because they signal availability for them. Raising standards is not about perfection. It is about intention backed by enforcement. It is about choosing what will no longer be acceptable and acting consistently on that choice. This consistency sends a clear signal to reality. Life does not need persuasion. It needs parameters. Once parameters are set and enforced, outcomes adjust to fit them because life always fills the space defined by standards, not by wishes. And the moment standards rise, reality is forced to respond by either meeting them or pushing back until the individual becomes strong enough to sustain them. And in that sustained enforcement, a new level of life becomes inevitable. Self-command precedes external success because no person can consistently direct the world around them without first being able to direct themselves. External success is visible, measurable, and often admired, but it is always downstream of an invisible internal order. That order is self-command. It is the ability to govern one's impulses, emotions, attention, and behavior in alignment with chosen standards rather than momentary feelings. Without self-command, effort becomes erratic, talent becomes unreliable, and opportunity becomes wasted. With self-command, even limited resources can be organized into momentum. Self-command begins with control of attention. Attention is the most valuable currency a person possesses, yet it is often surrendered without resistance. Distraction is not a minor inconvenience. It is a form of self-disorder. When attention is scattered, energy leaks. When energy leaks, execution weakens. A person who cannot hold their focus cannot hold their direction. Self-command means deciding where attention goes and refusing to let it be hijacked by impulse, noise, or novelty. This control does not require intensity. It requires consistency. Over time, focused attention compounds into skill, insight, and leverage. Emotional regulation is another pillar of self-command. Emotions are natural signals, but they are poor commanders. When emotions dictate behavior, consistency disappears. Progress becomes dependent on mood. External success, however, demands reliability. Clients, teams, systems, and opportunities all require predictable performance. Self-command does not suppress emotion. It places emotion in its proper role. Feelings are acknowledged, but decisions are made according to principle. This separation allows action to continue even when confidence fluctuates or discomfort appears. Those who master this separation gain a competitive advantage because they can act under conditions that paralyze others. Impulse control is equally central. Many failures attributed to lack of opportunity are actually failures of restraint, the inability to delay gratification. Resist temptation, or say no undermines long-term objectives. Self-command introduces pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, choice exists. Choice is power. Without pause, behavior becomes automatic and reactive. With pause, behavior becomes intentional. External success is built on thousands of such pauses, each one preserving alignment with a larger objective rather than sacrificing it for immediate relief. Self-command also governs language, both internal and external. The way a person speaks to themselves shapes their tolerance for difficulty. Internal dialogue that is undisciplined quickly becomes self-sabotaging. Complaints, rationalizations, and dramatization weaken resolve. Self-command disciplines language by replacing emotional exaggeration with factual assessment. Instead of, "This is impossible," the language becomes, "This is difficult and requires adjustment." This shift may appear subtle, but it radically alters behavior. Language frames perception, perception guides action, and action produces results. Another dimension of self-command is consistency of standards. External success requires sustained effort over time. Inconsistent standards produce inconsistent behavior. One day disciplined, the next day indulgent. 1 week focused, the next distracted. This inconsistency erodes trust, both self-trust and external trust. Self-command stabilizes standards. It reduces variance. It makes behavior predictable, not rigid, but reliable. Reliability is what allows others to depend on you, and dependence is what creates opportunity. People promote, partner with, and invest in those who demonstrate self-command because it signals low risk and high follow through. Self-command also precedes leadership. Leadership is influence, and influence begins with credibility. Credibility is built when words and actions align. A person who cannot command their own habits cannot credibly direct others. Even without formal authority, individuals with self-command naturally attract influence because they model control under pressure. They do not overreact. They do not chase validation. They do not collapse under stress. This composure creates confidence in others. External success often flows toward those who remain centered, while others become reactive. Time management is another expression of self-command. Time is neutral. It treats everyone equally. The difference lies in how it is commanded. Those without self-command react to time, filling it with urgency and interruption. Those with self-command allocate time according to priority. They decide in advance what deserves attention and protect it. This protection is not aggressive. It is deliberate. Over time, controlled use of time produces disproportionate results because important work is consistently addressed rather than perpetually postponed. Self-command also shapes resilience. When challenges arise, those without internal order experience internal chaos. They become overwhelmed not because the challenge is extraordinary, but because their internal systems are fragile. Self-command provides structure under stress. It allows the individual to break problems into actions and execute calmly. This calm execution is often mistaken for confidence, but it is actually control. Control over response pace and focus. This control prevents panic-based decisions that compromise long-term success. External success often magnifies internal disorder rather than correcting it. Increased responsibility, visibility, or pressure will expose weaknesses in self-command, not conceal them. This is why many people achieve temporary success and then lose it. Their external circumstances outgrow their internal discipline. Self-command ensures scalability. As responsibility increases, internal order expands to match it. This alignment allows success to be sustained rather than sabotaged. Self-command also protects against arrogance and complacency. When success arrives, it introduces new temptations, comfort, ego, distraction. Without self-command, these temptations erode the very habits that produced success. With self-command, success is treated as responsibility rather than entitlement. Standards are maintained. Discipline continues. Growth does not stall. This continuity is rare and therefore valuable. At its core, self-command is self-leadership. It is the decision to govern oneself rather than be governed by impulse, emotion, or environment. This governance is not harsh. It is respectful. It recognizes that potential is meaningless without structure. External success is simply the visible evidence of invisible order sustained over time. People admire outcomes, but outcomes are echoes. The source is always internal command, quietly exercised long before recognition appears. And those who understand this stop chasing success and start cultivating control, knowing that once the self is governed, the world becomes negotiable. Responsive and ultimately subordinate to the standards, discipline and direction set from within responsibility clarifies direction and purpose because it removes ambiguity about who is steering the course of a person's life. When responsibility is absent, direction becomes scattered and purpose becomes abstract. People drift between intentions, reacting to circumstances, opinions, and opportunities without a coherent trajectory. They may be busy, even exhausted, yet feel strangely unfulfilled because movement without responsibility lacks meaning. Responsibility introduces authorship. It answers the silent question of who decides, and once that question is answered, direction begins to sharpen and purpose begins to solidify. Without responsibility, direction is outsourced. People look to trends, authority figures, social expectations, or immediate pressures to tell them what to do next. This external orientation creates constant adjustment without commitment. One path is started, then abandoned. One goal is pursued, then replaced. This is not exploration. It is avoidance of ownership. Responsibility reverses this pattern by forcing a decision. When someone accepts responsibility for their life, they are compelled to choose a direction rather than wait for one to emerge. Choice creates commitment, and commitment creates clarity. Even an imperfect direction is more powerful than none because it allows energy to be concentrated instead of dispersed. Purpose often feels elusive because people search for it as a feeling rather than construct it through responsibility. Purpose is not discovered in isolation. It is revealed through sustained commitment to something that requires effort, sacrifice, and accountability. Responsibility anchors purpose in action. When a person says, "This is mine to carry," purpose begins to form around that declaration. It may start small, but it deepens as responsibility is honored. Purpose grows where responsibility is consistently upheld because meaning is derived from contribution, not contemplation. Responsibility also eliminates false options. When everything feels optional, nothing feels important. Indecision masquerades as freedom, but it produces anxiety and stagnation. Responsibility introduces constraint, and constraint creates focus. By accepting responsibility, a person implicitly says no to countless distractions. This narrowing of focus is what clarifies direction. Energy is no longer spent evaluating endless possibilities. It is invested in fulfilling chosen obligations. Over time, this investment builds momentum, and momentum reinforces purpose because progress feels intentional rather than accidental. Direction without responsibility is fragile. It collapses under pressure because there is no internal obligation to persist. Responsibility fortifies direction by binding it to identity. When someone takes responsibility, they do not merely pursue a goal. They become the kind of person who shows up for it. This identity shift stabilizes effort. The question is no longer whether to continue, but how to continue better. Purpose becomes less emotional and more structural. It is embedded in routine, decision-making, and standards rather than dependent on inspiration. Responsibility also clarifies priorities. Life presents infinite demands, but not all demands deserve equal attention. Without responsibility, priorities are dictated by urgency, noise, or convenience. Responsibility forces evaluation. It asks, what matters enough that I will be accountable for it? This question cuts through triviality. It elevates long-term significance over short-term comfort. As priorities clarify, purpose sharpens because purpose is essentially a hierarchy of values expressed through action. Responsibility aligns that hierarchy with behavior. Another way responsibility clarifies purpose is by revealing consequences. When people avoid responsibility, consequences feel random and unfair. When responsibility is embraced, consequences become instructive. Each outcome provides feedback about alignment or misalignment with chosen direction. This feedback loop accelerates learning. Purpose is refined through this process. What begins as a vague intention becomes a clear mission as the individual adjusts based on real-world results. Responsibility keeps this loop active because it prevents denial and rationalization. Responsibility also grounds purpose in reality rather than fantasy. Many people imagine purpose as something grand, dramatic, or externally validated. This expectation delays engagement. Responsibility reframes purpose as something practical and earned. It asks what needs to be done, not what will be admired. By focusing on responsibility, a person engages with the tangible needs in front of them. Purpose emerges from competence developed in service to those needs. Over time, small responsibilities aggregate into larger ones, expanding scope and impact. Purpose grows proportionally to responsibility accepted and fulfilled. Direction becomes clearer when responsibility is accepted because uncertainty diminishes. Much uncertainty comes from avoiding commitment. Once a person commits responsibly, many questions answer themselves. Time allocation becomes obvious. Skill development becomes necessary. Relationships either support the direction or conflict with it. This clarity can be uncomfortable because it demands adjustment, but it is liberating because it replaces confusion with order. Order creates confidence. Confidence sustains effort. Sustained effort reveals purpose. Responsibility also transforms setbacks into signposts. Without responsibility, setbacks feel like reasons to quit. With responsibility, they become indicators of where refinement is required. This interpretation keeps direction intact while improving execution. Purpose remains stable even as strategy evolves. This stability is crucial because purpose that collapses under difficulty was never rooted in responsibility to begin with. True purpose endures because it is anchored to obligation rather than convenience. At a deeper level, responsibility clarifies purpose by connecting the individual to consequence beyond themselves. When someone accepts responsibility, they recognize that their actions affect others, systems, or outcomes larger than personal comfort. This recognition expands perspective. Purpose shifts from self-centered desire to value-centered contribution. Contribution creates meaning because it situates effort within a larger context. Responsibility makes that context unavoidable. It demands awareness of impact, and impact is where purpose becomes tangible. Responsibility also disciplines ambition. Ambition without responsibility is restless. It jumps from idea to idea seeking fulfillment. Responsibility channels ambition into execution. It forces ambition to prove itself through service and results. This proof transforms vague aspiration into concrete direction. Purpose becomes less about becoming someone and more about doing something that matters consistently. Clarity of direction ultimately comes from deciding what you will be responsible for and what you will not. This boundary setting is an act of self-definition. It answers the question of who you are willing to be through what you are willing to carry. Purpose is not a declaration. It is a pattern. Responsibility creates that pattern through repeated choice. Each time responsibility is honored, direction sharpens. Each time it is avoided, direction blurs. Over time, the accumulation of responsible choices creates a clear line of movement that feels inevitable rather than forced, and that inevitability is experienced as purpose, not because it was found, but because it was built deliberately through ownership, commitment, and the willingness to stand behind one's choices, regardless of discomfort or uncertainty. Excuses dilute potential because they reduce the amount of effort, focus, and accountability a person is willing to apply to their own capacity. Potential is not a fixed quantity, it is conditional. It expands or contracts based on how consistently it is exercised. Excuses interrupt that exercise. They act like leaks in a system, slowly draining energy that could have been converted into skill, discipline, and progress. Every excuse accepted becomes a permission slip to perform below capacity. And over time, this permission reshapes identity in ways that are difficult to reverse. An excuse is not merely a reason. It is a psychological agreement to stop short. It may sound logical, justified, even compassionate, but its function is always the same: to explain why less was done than what was possible. This explanation may protect self-image in the moment, but it carries a hidden cost. Each time a person excuses themselves, they lower the internal standard for effort. The mind learns that discomfort can be negotiated away. Once that lesson is learned, potential begins to erode, not dramatically, but gradually, through lowered expectations and reduced follow-through. Excuses are especially dangerous because they often contain truth. Circumstances are difficult. Energy is limited. Time is scarce. Resources are uneven. These facts make excuses believable, which makes them effective at diluting potential. The problem is not that the excuse is false. The problem is that it becomes decisive. When facts become final verdicts rather than variables to be worked around, agency disappears. Potential requires agency to be activated. Without agency, capacity remains dormant. Potential thrives under tension. Growth occurs when a person operates slightly beyond their comfort zone. Excuses relieve the tension prematurely. They offer relief without growth. This relief feels good in the short term, but it deprives the individual of adaptation. Adaptation is how potential becomes ability. When excuses are used repeatedly, the individual stops encountering the resistance necessary for development. Over time, this avoidance produces stagnation disguised as realism. Another way excuses dilute potential is by shifting focus from what can be done to what cannot. Attention follows explanation. When someone explains why they cannot act, their mind organizes itself around limitation. Creativity narrows. Problem-solving shuts down. In contrast, when excuses are rejected, the mind is forced to search for alternatives. This search activates potential, Even imperfect action preserves momentum and keeps capacity engaged. Excuses halt this process by closing the search prematurely. Excuses also fragment responsibility. They divide ownership among circumstances, people, timing, or mood. This division weakens execution because no single agent feels fully accountable. When responsibility is fragmented, effort becomes conditional. Conditional effort produces conditional results. Potential, however, requires unconditional engagement. It requires showing up even when conditions are unfavorable. Excuses undermine this requirement by making engagement optional. One of the most subtle effects of excuses is how they distort self-perception. People judge themselves not only by outcomes, but by narratives. When excuses become habitual, the narrative shifts from "I am capable" to "I am limited." This shift may be unconscious, but it is powerful. Identity begins to form around constraint rather than possibility. Once identity contracts, behavior follows. The individual stops attempting things that once felt achievable. Potential shrinks not because it was lost, but because it was no longer accessed. Excuses also erode trust, especially self-trust. Each time a person makes a commitment and then excuses their way out of it, they weaken confidence in their own word. Over time, this produces internal skepticism. The individual stops fully believing their own intentions. This skepticism reduces ambition and effort because the mind anticipates future withdrawal. Potential requires belief in follow through. Excuses corrode that belief incrementally. Excuses often masquerade as self-care or balance. While rest and recovery are essential, excuses exploit these concepts to justify avoidance. True self-care supports long-term capacity. Excuses protect short-term comfort at the expense of long-term growth. The difference lies in honesty. Self-care is deliberate and restorative. Excuses are reactive and evasive. When excuses are confused for care, potential is diluted under the illusion of wisdom. Another consequence of excuses is that they normalize underperformance. Once an excuse is accepted once, it becomes easier to accept again. This repetition lowers the baseline of effort. What once felt unacceptable becomes tolerable. What was once temporary becomes permanent. Potential does not disappear suddenly. It fades through normalization of less than best behavior. This normalization is rarely noticed until the gap between capacity and reality becomes painful. Excuses also disrupt momentum. Progress depends on continuity. Even small breaks in effort can compound into large delays. Excuses introduce these breaks repeatedly. Each pause requires restarting, and restarting consumes energy that could have been used to advance. Over time, the cycle of stop and start exhausts motivation and reduces confidence. Potential thrives on flow, not interruption. Excuses create interruption disguised as justification. At a deeper level, excuses reflect a misunderstanding of fairness. Many people excuse themselves because they believe effort should be proportional to fairness. When life feels unfair, effort is withdrawn as a form of protest. This protest is ineffective because life does not respond to moral arguments. It responds to behavior. Withholding effort does not correct unfairness. It compounds its effects. Potential is wasted not because conditions were difficult, but because effort was withheld in response to difficulty. Excuses also prevent accurate feedback. When outcomes are explained away, lessons are lost. The individual cannot assess what truly needs improvement because responsibility has been displaced. Without clear feedback, Potential cannot be refined. Growth depends on correction. Excuses interrupt correction by protecting the ego from discomfort. This protection feels safe, but it slows development. The most damaging aspect of excuses is that they feel harmless individually. One excuse seems insignificant. It is the accumulation that matters. Each excuse slightly reduces the demand placed on the self. Over time, the self adapts to lower demand. Capacity adjusts downward. This adjustment is not conscious, but it is real. Potential becomes theoretical rather than practical. Excuses also affect how others respond. People quickly learn what standards someone holds themselves to. When excuses are frequent, expectations are lowered. Opportunities decrease. Responsibility is reassigned elsewhere. Potential that could have been expressed externally remains unrecognized because behavior did not signal readiness. This is not punishment, it is alignment. The world responds to demonstrated capacity, not stated potential. Rejecting excuses does not mean ignoring limits. It means refusing to let limits dictate identity. It means acknowledging difficulty without surrendering agency. This posture keeps potential engaged even under constraint. Effort may be slower. Progress may be incremental, but engagement preserves capacity. Excuses disengage it. Potential is activated through demand. Demand placed on the self must be deliberate and consistent. Excuses reduce that demand. When demand drops, capacity follows. When demand is maintained, capacity expands. This relationship is mechanical, not emotional. Understanding it changes how excuses are perceived. They are no longer harmless explanations. They are active agents of dilution. The individual who minimizes excuses does not become harsh or unreasonable. They become precise. They separate what is impossible from what is merely uncomfortable. They reserve excuses for true constraints and eliminate them everywhere else. This precision preserves energy for growth rather than explanation. Over time, this creates a widening gap between what they can do and what they once thought possible. Excuses dilute potential because they trade long-term capability for short-term relief. They offer comfort now at the cost of capacity later. Those who recognize this trade stop making it. They accept discomfort as the price of growth. They allow effort to expose weakness so it can be strengthened. They refuse to let explanation replace execution. In doing so, they keep their potential active, accessible, and expanding, not as an abstract promise, but as a lived capacity expressed through consistent action despite difficulty, fatigue, or uncertainty. Growth begins with honest self-accountability because without truth, there is nothing to improve. Improvement requires accurate diagnosis, and accurate diagnosis requires the willingness to see oneself clearly without distortion, defense, or denial. Self-accountability is not about self-blame or harsh judgment. It is about precision. It is the discipline of asking, what did I do? What did I fail to do? And what am I currently tolerating that is producing this result? Until those questions are answered honestly, growth remains theoretical. People may talk about change, plan for change, and even desire change, but without accountability, behavior remains unchanged. And without behavioral change, growth cannot occur. Most people avoid honest self-accountability because it threatens the ego. The ego seeks comfort, consistency, and protection. Accountability introduces friction. It disrupts comforting narratives and replaces them with responsibility. This disruption is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Growth requires tension between who you are and who you must become. Self-accountability creates the tension by exposing the gap between intention and execution. Without seeing the gap, there is no reason to close it. With visibility, improvement becomes unavoidable. Self-accountability also eliminates confusion. Many people feel stuck not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack clarity about their own role in their circumstances. They attribute outcomes to external forces while remaining uncertain about what to change internally. Honest self-accountability removes this uncertainty. It identifies patterns. It reveals habits, decisions, and attitudes that consistently produce certain results. Once patterns are visible, growth becomes a matter of adjustment rather than guesswork. A critical aspect of self-accountability is ownership of behavior rather than identity. It focuses on actions, not character. It does not say, "I am inadequate." It says, "This behavior is ineffective." This distinction preserves self-respect while enabling correction. Growth stalls when people confuse accountability with self-condemnation. When accountability is framed as attack, it is resisted. When it is framed as data, it is embraced. Honest self-accountability treats performance as information rather than a verdict. Self-accountability also restores agency. When individuals stop examining their own choices, they become dependent on circumstances to change. This dependence breeds frustration and helplessness. Accountability reverses this dynamic. It brings attention back to controllables. Even in difficult situations, there are always controllables: effort, attitude, preparation, response, and consistency. Focusing on these restores momentum. Growth resumes not because conditions improve, but because engagement deepens. Another reason growth begins with self-accountability is that learning depends on feedback. Feedback is useless if it is deflected. When people externalize responsibility, feedback is filtered through defensiveness. Lessons are missed. Errors are repeated. Self-accountability keeps feedback intact. It allows mistakes to be examined without distortion. This examination accelerates learning. Those who grow quickly are not those who avoid mistakes, but those who extract maximum information from them. Self-accountability also disciplines perception. It prevents exaggeration and minimization. Without accountability, people either dramatize obstacles or downplay their own role in failure. Honest accountability balances perception. It acknowledges difficulty without inflating it and acknowledges responsibility without overburdening it. This balance produces realistic optimism. The individual sees challenges clearly and still believes in their ability to respond effectively. Growth thrives in this psychological environment. Consistency in growth requires consistency in accountability. Occasional self-reflection produces occasional improvement. Continuous self-accountability produces continuous growth. This consistency transforms accountability into habit. The individual no longer waits for failure to reflect. They review performance proactively. This proactive stance prevents stagnation. Small course corrections replace large crises. Growth becomes smoother and more sustainable. Self-accountability also sharpens standards. When people avoid accountability, standards drift downward because there is no mechanism enforcing alignment between expectation and behavior. Honest accountability reasserts standards by confronting deviations immediately. It asks, did I meet the standard I set? If not, it demands correction. This demand keeps growth active. Standards without accountability are symbolic. Accountability turns them into operational rules. Another important function of self-accountability is that it neutralizes comparison. Many people measure growth by comparing themselves to others. This comparison distracts from personal progress and distorts motivation. Accountability redirects attention inward. The comparison becomes temporal rather than social. The question shifts from, how do I rank? To, am I improving? This shift is powerful because it places growth fully under personal control. Progress is measured against previous performance, not external benchmarks. Self-accountability also strengthens resilience. When setbacks occur, accountable individuals do not collapse into self-pity or blame. They assess. They ask what can be learned and adjusted. This response preserves confidence because it reinforces the belief that outcomes are influenced by action. Growth continues even through failure because failure is processed constructively. Without accountability, failure feels final. With accountability, it becomes transitional. Honest self-accountability also exposes hidden costs. Many behaviors that feel harmless carry long-term consequences. Procrastination, distraction, inconsistency, and avoidance often appear insignificant individually. Accountability reveals their cumulative impact. This revelation creates urgency. Growth accelerates when the cost of inaction becomes clear. Accountability makes those costs visible before they become irreversible. Accountability also requires courage. It takes courage to admit missed opportunities, wasted time, and unfulfilled potential. Yet this courage is rewarded. Each admission reduces internal resistance. The individual no longer has to defend a false narrative. Energy once used for justification becomes available for execution. Growth requires energy. Accountability frees it. At a deeper level, self-accountability aligns identity with reality. Many people cling to an aspirational identity disconnected from their behavior. Accountability reconciles the two. It forces identity to be earned rather than assumed. This reconciliation may feel confronting, but it is stabilizing. A grounded identity is more flexible and resilient than a fragile ideal. Growth becomes a process of alignment rather than aspiration. Self-accountability also clarifies responsibility boundaries. It distinguishes between what is yours to fix and what is not. This distinction prevents burnout and resentment. Growth is sustained when effort is applied where it matters most. Accountability ensures that effort is not wasted on uncontrollable factors or misdirected blame. It focuses improvement where improvement is possible. Another critical aspect of honest self-accountability is that it prevents repetition of failure under new names. Without accountability, people repeat the same patterns in different contexts and wonder why results do not change. Accountability recognizes the pattern beneath the surface. It identifies the common behavior producing repeated outcomes. Once identified, that behavior can be addressed directly. Growth becomes structural rather than cosmetic. Self-accountability also builds credibility. When individuals openly acknowledge their role in outcomes, others trust them more. This trust creates opportunity. People are more willing to support, mentor, or collaborate with those who demonstrate accountability. Growth is often accelerated through access, and access is granted to those who can be trusted to own their actions. Growth ultimately depends on the ability to tell oneself the truth without collapse. Honest self accountability develops that ability. It trains the mind to face reality without defensiveness and respond without delay. This capacity separates those who plateau from those who evolve. Those who grow do not see accountability as punishment. They see it as orientation. It tells them where they are so they can decide where to go next. And that decision, repeated daily, is what transforms effort into progress, stagnation into movement, and potential into realized capacity through the continuous practice of seeing clearly, adjusting deliberately, and acting consistently in alignment with what reality reveals rather than what comfort prefers. Mastery of self determines mastery of life, because life reflects the level of internal order a person sustains over time. External circumstances may appear complex, unpredictable, or unfair, but they are secondary to the condition of the individual navigating them. A person who lacks self-mastery will struggle regardless of opportunity, while a person who possesses self-mastery will extract progress from almost any situation. This is not philosophy, it is observable reality. Life does not respond primarily to intelligence, talent, or desire. It responds to consistency, restraint, clarity, and control, all of which originate internally before they ever manifest externally. Self-mastery begins with awareness. One cannot command what one does not observe. Many people live reactively, unaware of how their habits, emotions, and impulses govern their behavior. They believe they are making choices when in reality they are repeating patterns. Self-mastery interrupts this automation. It requires the ability to notice thoughts without obeying them, feelings without surrendering to them, urges without acting on them. This awareness creates a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap lies freedom. Without that gap, life dictates behavior. With it, the individual begins to dictate outcomes. Emotional control is a cornerstone of self-mastery. Emotions are powerful, but they are transient. When emotions lead, decisions become inconsistent. Inconsistency produces instability, and instability limits progress. A person who has not mastered their emotional responses will overreact to criticism, collapse under pressure, and chase validation rather than results. Life amplifies these weaknesses. Success introduces stress. Responsibility introduces friction. Visibility introduces judgment. Without emotional mastery, these forces overwhelm rather than elevate. With emotional mastery, they are navigated calmly and productively. Impulse regulation is equally critical. Life constantly presents short-term rewards that undermine long-term goals. Comfort, distraction, indulgence, and avoidance are always available. Without self-mastery, these impulses dominate behavior. Progress slows not because the individual lacks ambition, but because they lack restraint. Mastery of self means choosing what is beneficial over what is immediately pleasing. It means delaying gratification, not as an act of denial, but as an investment. Those who master this trade accumulate advantage quietly, while others repeatedly reset their progress. Self-mastery also governs attention. Attention determines what grows. Whatever receives consistent focus expands in influence. A scattered mind produces scattered results. A focused mind produces leverage. Modern life competes aggressively for attention, and without self-mastery, attention is surrendered reflexively. This surrender fragments effort and dilutes impact. Those who master their attention choose deliberately what deserves focus and for how long. This choice compounds into skill, insight, and effectiveness. Life responds to focused effort because focused effort produces tangible outcomes. Discipline is the behavioral expression of self-mastery. Discipline is not force, it is alignment. It aligns behavior with intention regardless of internal resistance. Resistance is normal. Fatigue, doubt, and discomfort are part of every meaningful pursuit. Self-mastery does not eliminate resistance. It overrides it. It allows action to proceed even when motivation fades. This reliability is rare, and rarity creates value. Life rewards those who can be depended upon, including by themselves. Self-mastery also determines how one handles adversity. Challenges are inevitable. What differs is response. Without self-mastery, adversity produces resentment, avoidance, or despair. With self-mastery, adversity produces analysis, adjustment, and persistence. The external situation may be the same, but the internal response changes everything. Life does not remove obstacles for those who complain. It yields to those who adapt. Adaptation requires internal command. Another dimension of self-mastery is integrity. Integrity is alignment between values and behavior. Without self-mastery, values remain aspirational rather than operational. A person may value honesty, growth, or excellence, yet behave inconsistently because impulse overrides principle. This misalignment creates internal friction and external unreliability. Self-mastery resolves this by placing principle above impulse. Over time, this consistency builds trust, both internally and externally. Trust expands opportunity. Opportunity expands influence. Influence shapes life. Self-mastery also governs self-talk. The internal narrative a person maintains determines how they interpret events. Undisciplined self-talk exaggerates difficulty, personalizes failure, and undermines confidence. Disciplined self-talk is factual, measured, and constructive. It does not deny difficulty, but it does not dramatize it. This controlled narrative preserves energy for action. Life responds to those who remain composed under pressure because composure enables effective decision making when others become reactive. Time management is another reflection of self-mastery. Time itself is neutral. It is either commanded or squandered. Without self-mastery, time is consumed by urgency and interruption. With self-mastery, time is allocated according to priority. This allocation ensures that important tasks receive consistent attention rather than perpetual postponement. Over years, this difference becomes decisive. Life rewards those who invest time deliberately because deliberate investment produces compounding returns. Self-mastery also protects success once it is achieved. Many people reach a level of success only to lose it because their internal discipline does not scale with their external circumstances. Increased freedom, resources, and attention amplify existing weaknesses. Without self-mastery, success becomes destabilizing. With self-mastery, success becomes sustainable. Standards are maintained. Habits remain intact. Growth continues. Life does not test people to punish them. It tests them to reveal whether their internal structure can support greater responsibility. At a deeper level, self-mastery is self-leadership. It is the decision to govern oneself rather than be governed by environment, emotion, or impulse. This governance is not rigid or joyless. It is liberating. It reduces chaos. It increases clarity. It transforms effort into direction. A self-mastered individual is not immune to difficulty, but they are resilient within it. They do not wait for life to become easier. They become stronger, more disciplined, and more precise in response. Life mastery is often misunderstood as control over others or circumstances. In reality, it is the ability to remain centered regardless of external fluctuation. A person who has mastered themselves is not easily destabilized. Praise does not inflate them. Criticism does not derail them. Success does not make them complacent. Failure does not make them quit. This stability creates long-term advantage because life is volatile, and those who remain stable within volatility outperform those who react emotionally to every change. Mastery of self also sharpens judgment. When internal noise is reduced, perception improves. Decisions become clearer. Priorities become obvious. This clarity improves outcomes across all domains. Life appears more manageable not because it has simplified, but because the individual has become capable of handling complexity without losing direction. Ultimately, life mirrors the individual. Disorganized minds produce disorganized lives. Disciplined minds produce ordered progress. This mirror is impartial. It reflects what is practiced, not what is desired. Those who chase external mastery without internal mastery experience frustration and instability. Those who begin with self-mastery gradually find that life becomes more responsive, more navigable, and more aligned with their intentions, not because life has changed its rules, but because they have developed the internal command necessary to operate effectively within those rules. And once that command is established, mastery ceases to be something pursued externally and becomes something expressed naturally through consistent behavior, clear judgment, disciplined action, and the quiet authority of a person who governs themselves regardless of circumstance